you've got one of your evening, everybody. Thanks to everyone who's joining us live. It's also going to become a podcast as well. Better just explain for people who've watching the podcast, because you tried to join us live and had problems with the link. We're just updating our websites at the moment, but hopefully people that want to participate tonight will at least catch up with the podcast. So I'm delighted to introduce my friend, Councillor Asma Islam, who's councillor in Tower Hamlets, which in itself is a tough job. She's also the Deputy Cabinet Member for Housing, a fellow member of the National Executive of the Labour Housing Group, and also I'm really pleased she facilitates the Labour Housing Group Social Housing Working Group. So I think, Asma, your plan is to talk for about 15 minutes or so. I'll ask you a couple of what I hope are intelligent questions, and then we'll just throw it open. We tend to run for about an hour, but if we've got a queue of questions, we go a little bit over that. So, Asma, over to you.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you for everyone that's joined tonight. I really appreciate everyone making the time to come and talk about what is a real passion of mine about social housing. So my name is Asma Islam, and I grew up in Tower Hamlets in a council home. My home that was part of a stock transfer in the late 90s, early 2000s. Due to that, my estate went through an estate regeneration thanks to Popular Haka, a local housing association that was set up to bring council homes back up to decent standard. This changed mine and my family's life, so I know firsthand what impacts good Labour housing policies can have on families like mine. I now serve as a councillor in Tower Hamlets. So I'm going to start with introduction and some national context. So as a councillor in Tower Hamlets, I've witnessed firsthand the pressing challenges facing social housing in our borough. Social housing is not just a local issue, it's a national concern and the cornerstone of Labour values. This presentation aims to share local insights that reflect broader systematic problems in housing management and maintenance. By examining the situation in Tower Hamlets, we can better understand the national crisis and explore solutions that promote housing justice and accountability. So the national context. The UK faces a severe housing crisis with over 1.2 million households on waiting lists and 40% of social homes built before 1980. The estimated backlog in repairs exceeds £10 billion across England. Policy pressures such as Right to Buy scheme have significantly reduced the available stock, while chronic underfunding of councils and housing associations has exacerbated maintenance issues. Regulatory gaps in maintenance standards further compound the problem. External factors, also like Brexit and COVID-19 pandemic, have strained resources and disrupted housing services, especially when it comes to repairs, making it harder for local authorities to meet the growing demands. Local experience and systematic challenges. So Tower Hamlets is a high-density borough with significant housing needs. We have about 22,000 people on the housing register. Common issues, which a lot of you may relate back to where you might live. Common issues like damp and mold, delayed repairs, and poor contractor accountability. Residents frequently report a lack of transparency in housing association responses. Case examples always highlight tenants waiting months for basic repairs, estates with repeated fire safety concerns, and disrepair disproportionately affecting vulnerable groups such as the elderly and disabled. These local experiences underscore the urgent need for systematic reform in housing management and maintenance. The picture you see in the slide is of Boundary Estate in Weavers Ward, where I'm a councillor. This was built in 1890 by the London County Council. The Boundary Estate was the UK's first social housing estate, designed not just to house people, but to build community. It included homes, a school, a laundrette, shops, grocers, and Arnold's Circus as its green heart, showing that housing policy can be about dignity, well-being, and public life. 135 years on, and this is the 135th anniversary this year, it remains a symbol of what progressive public investment can achieve. But like many estates across the UK, it's now suffering from neglect and urgently needs reinvestment to meet modern standards. The Boundary Estate reminds us that housing is more than shelter. It's about building communities that thrive. That's the legacy we must protect and renew. And if anyone wants a tour of the Boundary Estate, I'll be more than happy to do that for you. So, systematic challenges in social housing include maintenance failures, lack of resident voice, and weak accountability. For example, as part of stock transfer agreements, councillors were able to sit on the board of housing associations who are responsible for what was once council stock. This was ensuring democratic oversight of former council homes. But from the late 2000s, governance reforms phased this out, replacing councillors with independent members to what was sold as a way to avoid conflicts and professionalise boards. Till date, this still baffles me why this has even happened. Maintenance is often reactive rather than preventative, with inconsistent standards across housing providers and insufficient investment in aging stock. Residents usually feel ignored and blamed, facing poor communication and follow-up. There is a pressing need for co-production in housing decisions to ensure that tenant perspectives are valued. Councils have limited enforcement powers and housing associations are not subject to the same scrutiny. The Housing Ombudsman faces a backlog leading to slow resolution of complaints. So 3 big impacts that I think affected the social housing in this country: right to buy, stock transfer, and Grenfell impact. Right to buy has hollowed out council estates. 40% of homes sold now sit in private hands, driving up rents and some may say breaking up communities. Massive loss in social homes without a real plan for replacement. This drove the housing register list, especially the bigger family size homes, to what we see today. Stock transfer. So the consequences of stock transfer: since the 1980s, councils have been pushed to transfer housing stock to housing associations as a way to unlock investment. Under Labour, this helped improve standards through the Decent Home programmes. Labour used stock transfer to bring investment back into rundown homes. Housing associations could borrow to fund repairs councils were not allowed to do. It delivered billions in upgrades through Decent Home programmes, but we must now confront the long-term cost of losing public control. But today, we're seeing the consequences: fragmented accountability, unclear repair responsibilities, and limited democratic oversight. Councillors and MPs have far less influence over housing associations than they do over council-run homes. In Tower Hamlets and across the country, residents are raising the alarm. Housing associations are failing to respond to repairs, and the regulator of social housing lacks the teeth to enforce standards. This isn't to say that there aren't housing associations that are working really well or that they aren't trying their best, because they are. We also must not forget the pressure they are also under due to all the impacts I will address in the presentation. Impact of Grenfell. The Grenfell Tower tragedy exposed widespread neglect in maintenance, fire safety, and tenant engagement, particularly in high-rise social housing blocks. Housing associations and councils were found to have poor oversight and ineffective communication. The tragedy highlighted the lack of accountability in housing management structures, especially with outsourced or arm's length organisations like the Tenant Management Organisation in Kensington. In some cases, councils were forced to reassume direct control over housing stock. Grenfell served as a wake-up call, prompting legislative reforms and renewed focus on housing safety. Not to forget, this came at a cost to local government and registered social landlords without sufficient support from central government. So the legislative and financial landscape. In response to Grenfell, the government introduced several key legislative changes. The Social Housing Regulation Act 2023, which also includes Awab's Law, which mandates prompt action on hazards like mold and requires professional qualification for social housing managers. The Building Safety Act 2022 established the Building Safety Regulator and introduced safety gateways at planning, design, and pre-occupation stages. The government accepted all 58 recommendations from the Grenfell inquiry, launching a single construction regulator and implementing a legal duty of candor. These reforms aim to enhance safety and accountability in housing. I look forward to our conversation later on about that. So, the funding implications. The financial burden of implementing building safety standards is immense. The Local Government Association, LGA, estimates that £7.7 billion is needed to meet these standards in council housing. Just think about that. Housing revenue accounts, HRAs, are under severe strain due to competing priorities such as safety upgrades, energy efficiency, decarbonisation, and new builds. While some government funding has been provided, it covers only a fraction of the required investment. Councils and housing associations are expected to shoulder much of the cost, raising concerns about long-term sustainability. It's no surprise campaigns are calling for a new sustainable funding framework and full access to national remediation funds. Labour's response and future vision. So, in its first year in government, Labour has made significant strides in housing policy. Key achievements include introduction of Awab's Law, strengthening the regulator of social housing, increasing funding for cladding remediation, and launching the Remediation Acceleration Plan. Changes to the Right to Buy scheme. Labour has also established the National Housing Bank and the New Homes Accelerator to support its pledge to build 1.5 million homes. Promise for the future, including building 100,000 social homes per year, restoring the accountability in housing management, investing in retrofit and regeneration, and empowering tenants through co-production and scrutiny. Despite progress, significant challenges remain. Labour must work to close £7.7 billion funding gap for building safety and strengthen enforcement powers for councils. Addressing fragmented accountability in stock transfer states is crucial, and I've covered some of that earlier on. A national repair strategy is needed to ensure consistent maintenance standards across the country. Support tenant-led housing forums and amplifying the residents' voice will enhance transparency and trust. And some might say that this already exists in their boroughs and their local authorities. However, a lot of these forums come as an advisory board and not with any powers to enforce or do anything about it. Lastly, I will say the last Labour government did put forward an ambitious plan that brought forward investment into existing social homes. Despite the issues we have seen that in the last 15 years that came with losing control over council stock, we must all admit that it did bring council homes up to standard. But what we need from this government now is an ambitious part 2 of that programme to help bring these homes that we have back into standard so that people who live in them have the right to live in a safe, secure home. And lastly, I just want to end with this. Every family deserves a safe, warm, and secure place to live. And it's this Labour government's duty to make that a reality, not just a privilege. Thank you. And I look forward to everyone's contribution.
Yeah, Asma, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you. I just wanted to make an observation and then I'll throw it open. So when I go to forums of housing managers and councillors, it's very much about the cash. And of course, it is about the cash. There's chronic underfunding. But when I go to tenants' meetings, they talk about the cultural stuff. They talk about lack of respect, stigmatization, sometimes racism. So how do you think we or you as Labour councillors can address that? The kind of fairly generalized anger that tenants feel about the way they're treated.
Yes. And so, I've covered that in my presentation. One of the biggest reasons why you've got these sets of feelings that come towards, especially in meetings like this, and anger and frustration is because of the number of years that people and families have had to suffer the standards and the issues in their homes. And the issue that we face, especially in the last few years, is the space is always dominated about, when we're speaking about the housing crisis, is about building new homes. And absolutely, we need to build new homes. But there are people that live in social homes that aren't up to standards, and that you have a competing priorities. And when we do the narration, when we talk about these things in the communities and with people, we tend to not understand what the real everyday problems are and what they are faced with, because housing is an overarching issue that affects families. It affects your mental health. It affects your children's education. It affects your health. And we've seen that. And so when residents aren't able to see that, then they've waited as long, and in many cases we would call them unreasonable timelines in which they're waiting for an outcome or a resolution. Therefore, these are the kind of reasons why we unfortunately get to see the sort of distorted version of communities not united, because it's new homes versus old homes. Then you have the standards of repairs not being fixed, and you're either making your local authority the enemy, or your housing association the enemy, or something or that, because everyone wants a place to blame. And if you're the person that is talking to the person that's had to suffer for the last few years in the damp and mold that they're living in, then you're going to be the one to get it. So it's about understanding the communities that we serve and understanding how we can help navigate those frustrations and issues into a place where we can actually achieve something.
Yeah, that's brilliant. One final question from me. So you talked about the regulator of social housing not having teeth, and then Labour moving to uh, increase the powers of the regulator. What How would you like to see the regulator intervene at a local level?
I'd like to see, firstly, legislations change where a lot of this is due to funding, deprived funding for local government and housing associations, which I did cover as well in the presentation. That those are the reasons why there are delays in repairs. Those are the reasons why stock conditions are in the way that they are. This year alone, we've seen, if I take the example of London, the number of local authorities that have been deregulated by the housing regulators. Apart from Westminster, I think, who's got a C1 rating, everyone else in some shape or form has gone down in the rating.
Yes,
And that's a real
C3 or C4. Yeah,
yes, and so
yeah.
that's a real picture of what's really going on. We need the regulators to have not only just powers to be able to be responsive, it's the idea of being able to remedy and be able to prevent the prevention work. And right now, we're not in a place that can do that. And one of the things that I do have to say, we need to wait a bit more time to see the results of some of the changes that we've seen. But anyone that's a councillor, anyone that's working in the housing sector or local authority or public service will tell you that the situation for current stock in this country is in a dire situation. It doesn't matter where you are, an urban place, in London, in Tower Hamlets, anywhere else in the UK, it seems to be the same story all over.
Yeah, 100% agree. Enough from me. So we're a fairly small group. So if people just jump in with questions or any comments you've got.
Thanks, Asma. You actually reflect a lot of the experience of social housing tenants, and we do try. We try not to get into fights and confrontation, but and no matter how much one writes to one's landlord and points out that there are deficiencies and issues that need to be improved, etc., one gets a very bland reply with lots of platitudes about how they're trying to put residents at the heart of everything they do, and yet actually nothing gets done. Well, very little gets done. It's ridiculous to say that nothing is done, because the services are still supplied to some extent, but it's always it's almost a begrudging service, isn't it? So what your presentation absolutely resonated. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't get your first name. Is that Mary?
It's a horrible first name, and I'm not telling you it.
Oh, well, thank you for your contribution. And yes, I do agree. And it's about us doing the same thing over and over again and trying to expect a different result until we genuinely have that big investment that we did from the last Labour government into social housing. Nothing's really going to change, because we know local governments are struggling. We know housing associations are struggling. We need a big overhaul in order to see something different happen.
Okay, if we go Kevin and then over to Layla. So Kevin?
Thank you, Andy. Yep, I think with social housing, we really need to be able to go out and sort of like create, an environment where residents and tenants can really flourish and thrive in life. It's important to know that obviously housing is a human right. Everybody needs a place to call home. Everybody needs a place that's secure, that's not going to be pulled out from underneath them, due to like a Section 21 no fault eviction, or should I say, with private landlords where they put the rent up and people are finding that, it's just becoming ever so more expensive to be able to, to live and survive rather than thrive and really sort of like, flourish in life. I think as well as the physical issues to do with housing, such as like the conditions of buildings. I mean, obviously that's a big issue, and things such as say, for example, the way that residents are treated by the council, because residents should be treated with respect, they should be treated with dignity, and they should be treated in a way where there's no suspicion between the landlord and the tenant, and really there's sort of like a reciprocal sort of like relationship between the tenants and the landlords. So there's no suspicion, there's no dissatisfaction, and really I think that that is conducive for good mental health for tenants, because if you're in a position where you're just fighting all the time, or to get things done, or you're in a position where you're nervous and you're concerned and you think, well, hang on, if I raise my head above the parapet and complain about a bad quality repair, am I going to get evicted? That's not on at all. That should not be the case at all in any shape, form, or way whatsoever. And I think in addition to these things, there needs to be, I mean, from my personal experience, I think there should be a way of supporting residents as well, tenants as well, by saying, we're not just going to put a roof over your head. We're not just going to give you a great place to live that's secure and stable, but we're actually going to help you gain access to life chances, such as things like giving residents, tenants access to adult education and learning courses, community groups, cultural groups for arts and music, and so on. I think, this has got to be the watershed moment where we say there's actually going to be equity in society. It's not just going to be the case of, people renting privately, homeowners and council tenants, living different lives. It should be the fact that, there should be equity. I think that, there should be equity in this, in society. There should be a way where we can actually say, do you know what? We're actually gonna focus on the big issues of the day, such as conditions of properties, the way tenants are treated by the councils, life chances and opportunities for tenants, such as courses, groups, culture and arts, and all that kind of stuff. And I think really at the crux of it. We need to be saying, actually, this is where we're gonna, give people opportunities, lifting kids out of poverty, dealing with child poverty, which is a massive issue. I know a lot of people struggling due to the cost of living, and also thinking, poverty in general. And it needs to be dealt with, and it needs to be addressed, because I just think it's desperately unfair when you've got, a portion of society who, for the last 14 years, by the Tory government, have been left behind in some way or another. There needs to be.
Kevin, that's brilliantly said. Shall I let Asma respond to that?
Yeah, of course you can.
Thank you, Kevin. I think I do agree with a lot of what you've said. And with that said, I do have to say that there are loads of offices that work for local authorities, and I can speak for my own. The grassroots, frontline staff, sorry, are under so much pressure, especially housing options, if it comes to the homeless unit. And sometimes residents, we have to be honest, residents don't get the service they deserve or the service we aspire to achieve. And we have to look at it in a really holistic way, where if we putting all the blame on the local authority, yes, local authorities should be doing better, and they should have an improvement plan and a way forward of how to be able to serve residents when they are faced with that face-to-face communication, when they do have to come in to see you about something in their home. But there is something about the local authorities' pressures. You've got £1 to do £10 worth of what would really cost you £10 to do. So we have to take that into consideration. That's why I talk about, if we're going to get to the root of the problem, we really need central government to be able to start looking at a more holistic way and giving us the ability to really get to the root of the problem, and not just sticky plaster politics, which I try and really stay away from. I also want to say, in the last 15 years, under the consecutive Tory governments, what the other thing that we've had to see is not only local authorities having to step up in places that they wouldn't have done before, which has strained the finances, but also charity sectors. You talked about residents not knowing where to go and what advice that they need and what their rights are. A lot of charity sectors have really done a lot of great work, and yes, funding is very restrictive for them as well. But I do want to highlight the fact that they do a great job, and they have been supporting lots of residents through it. But apart from that, everything else you said, I don't think I can disagree with.
Thank you.
Okay, Layla, you've been waiting really patiently. Do you want to come in?
Hello, can you hear me okay? Hi, Asma, hi.
Hello.
Nice to see you, and thank you for your presentation. It's just more like a contribution. So I'm a councillor in Croydon, which obviously was sadly famous for Regina Road, which was really a stain on the Labour administration at the time. And so obviously we've had to learn a lot of lessons from this, and we've paid the price because we're in opposition, and we've been in opposition the past 4 years. But we lucky in the sense that our HRA is actually quite healthy, because we haven't been historically investing enough in our stock. And I get quite frustrated because I just want to go spend, and make things happen. But there's an over cautiousness, because, like you said, the investment with the new Labour government is still uncertain in terms of what level of HRA is going to be, funded. And I just want to talk about other things like voids as well, and the impact it has, the wider impact it has. We have a lot of issues where, because it's not a standard repair, they don't deal with it, and so in the end, a void that could have been turned around in, say, 30 days becomes a complex void, which means we get so many houses that for a long period of time, are just not available to place people in. And I don't know whether this is something that other people have noticed, because some voids Obviously London is built on clay. We got a lot of voids with subsidence issues, with people, houses with ceiling falling down onto them, because subsidence. And subsidence costs a lot of money to repair, and then just not repairing them, they're just letting them get into even more disrepair until, one day they hope they'll have a silver bullet and have the money. And the other thing for me that I'm quite passionate about as well is all this amenity land that we've got around our estates when nothing's being done with it, and all you have is these signs with no ball games, no ball games, no ball games. And the government, I think, set up a select committee recently about, wanting a national play strategy. But I find that even in Labour councils, and it's not just in Croydon, there is this reluctance to invest even a little bit of money to bring in, even though we have so many families in those estates, to put in, play. And when they do, it's just like a piece of equipment there, and that's it. There's no real thinking about, how you can really create a community around that space. And then my last point was about the tenants' voice. So in Croydon, under the Tories, we had a tenants' charter being signed up, which was good. But we also are pushing for a forum, now that we're no longer under the notice has been lifted from Croydon. So we're trying to have this tenants forum, but where they can have a method of escalating straight to cabinet, because you said earlier in your presentation that usually these tenants forums, or whatever we call them, don't have any teeth. So one thing we're pushing for is that whatever group that's being set up at the moment has a method to escalate directly to cabinet. But the Tories want to use this as a ploy to then get rid of our scrutiny committee on housing, and we're like, no, it's not the same. This is about tenants' voice, But yeah, just wanted your thoughts on those 3 points. Thank you.
Thanks, Leila. So firstly, in solidarity for both of us, we also went into opposition same time as you did in the last election, and we have the same system, the mirror system, which adds another layer of complications. There's lots of things you said that I absolutely resonate with, and I recognize it in Tower Hamlets. Can I start from the beginning of voids? I will say one thing is actually, this is something that we've been pretty good over the years in Tower Hamlets, is keeping an eye on the voids, because our situation is, the housing register is so long, and every time we're in our surgeries, like, at least you're going to get half of the constituents that's going to come and see you is going to be about housing issues. So we're always reminded about our top priority, which is housing. And so voids, I would advise that if you're on scrutiny committee, or if you've got colleagues on that committee, is to keep the pressure on officers of asking why it's taking so long, what the turnaround is, and what the issues are. And what you'd find, if you dig a little bit, is it's actually the way that your local authority is going to be contracting repairs out and maintenance out. Right. And so you've got to keep the pressure on. And one of the silver lining of being in opposition is you can complain about everything. You don't have to think about, being careful, because it's not your administration and it's not your mayor. So I will say use every avenue you have to make it, because this is important, because the quicker we can get a void property back in order, it means we can get a family back in there, rehouse.
I think you spot on there. It's those contracts, because they're not standard repairs. It doesn't fit into a box, and so it just gets parked, doesn't it? Yeah.
Keep digging, ask the questions, keep sending emails. If you've got a members inquiry route, use that to ask those questions and piece the puzzle together for yourself. I'll give an example of Westminster, where the last Tory administration put the council into 10-year contracts with certain contractors. the Labour administration have turned that around. That's absolutely ridiculous. Why would you go into a 10-year contract? That's a very long time. So if that helps you, and I'm happy to take these conversations offline as well in order to help you. Regarding green space, I completely understand where you're coming from about that. I will say Section 106, in opposition, make sure you're making a lot of noise about how the mayor is using the Section 106 money.
I do, I keep my eye on it. He's not
Yeah.
interested.
And what the thing I find in my experience about estates is we've obviously in Tower Hamlets have got rid of have lost, not got rid of, we lost a lot of estates to the stock transfer. And when that happens, it means we're running out of space here to build more homes. You can't regenerate estates because they don't belong to you. You don't have the same rights. So someone like Popular Harker and any other housing associations in Tower Hamlets, they're the ones that have to be doing the regeneration or building more homes in those estates, or utilizing that estate to make it, add some more greenery, add the play area, whatever it might be. So that's another downfall about the stock transfer where we've lost control. And yeah, so just keep on raising. You're in a very good position to be able to raise the concerns and the issues, and it sounds like you're on the right track.
Thank you. Thanks.
Sorry, any other questions, comments? Please jump in. I did see something in the chat from Peter who can't join us. What did he say? Sorry about this. I just find his comments. Yeah. So Peter said. Oh, in fact, are you able to ask the question yourself, Peter? No? Okay, I'll run through his question. So thank you, Asma, 100% agree with you. In London Borough of Tower Hamlets, there's an emphasis on large-scale works, such as unnecessary electrical or door entry, that are already outdated, rather than everyday repairs to doors, windows, etc. Some of these decades old. How do we change the emphasis and get the London Borough of Tower Hamlets to listen to residents? And there's another bit of the question, which is that there seems to be a skills and understanding shortage. So I'm sure this is one of the massive challenges for you in Tower Hamlets, particularly in opposition around organising major works.
Yeah, so I'll take the last one first. So I know in Labour Housing Group, Andy and other colleagues have been talking about the skills deficit in the housing sector as a whole, and just the training that is required. And the training is not something that should be as of when or when new employees join an organization. We should really be looking at how we do regular updates, because housing is one of those things that honestly does need for us to come back once a year, every 6 months, whatever it might be, to refresh. Understanding how legislation might have changed, understanding how local changes have impacted the borough, or how residents and the people living on the estates, how things have changed, and be able to really add that on to the knowledge base and the skill sets. That's a wider conversation, Peter. But I think we're all on the same page about that. And it's definitely a subject we definitely want to do as an exec from Labour Housing Group in this, and we'll make sure we're keeping you informed about that. Regarding major works, so major works, like other local authorities, have been such a massive problem for us over the years. We've gone from a place where I think we were very well in making sure that bringing our homes back up to standards, and making sure that we're able to really think ahead of what the residents need. For example, when we were building lots of open plans, we found out that they weren't actually suiting our communities here in Tower Hamlets because of the larger size families, some of the cultural barriers in open plan kitchens. So things that we've been quite good at being reactive. However, I think like everywhere else, the last 7-8 years have really taken a toll on housing and major works. We used to have, our housing was under an ALMO. Sat on the board for about 4 years, holding our ALMO to account, and we actually, the housing regulators did score us as one of the best landlords of the year. I can't remember which year it was. It was such a long time ago, but we have been a place of excellence before, and over especially the last 3.5 years, I'd say it's been absolutely disastrous, especially with this current mayor. He talks a lot about housing being his priority, but he's so out of touch and out of date about the changes in local government and the central government as a whole. Unfortunately, Tower Hamlets struggles on so many fronts on housing, and major works is one of them, because when he chose to bring the ALMO in-house, which I agree was the right decision, but the way in which he did it, which was shift and lift, and it meant a lot of the housing services had come into the council when it became shared services, in order to have efficiency savings, because you're no longer running two organizations, you're running one. And it meant we lost a lot of staff, and it's a problem that Tower Hamlets has, that we cannot maintain senior level officers, but we also just can't we haven't able to maintain the staff from the ALMO into the council. And major works, one of the biggest delays has been because of bringing it in-house, meant that some of the other things had to take a backseat while other priorities took precedent, which was the right thing to do, but ultimately the residents suffer, and there was a better way to do that. And if I was the mayor and if I was this administration, I think they all owe the borough an apology on their record on housing. That's all I can say to you, Peter, without getting too political, and I feel like I've already done that.
Okay, Kevin?
Thank you, Andy. I just like to ask you, Asma, what your position and view is on tenant management organisations, because I mean, I live under one in Birmingham, which is called Four Towers TMO, and it's an example of one where they've done things really well. They've got, operate within budget. The repair service is great, for general repairs around the flats. The quality of the housing team are fantastic, and things seem to have gone really well. But now, obviously, there's examples like, say, for example, Kensington, Chelsea Borough TMO, where that went horrendously wrong with Grenfell Tower. But in general, my question is, if you've got a large authority like Birmingham and you've got tenants who are keen to exercise their right to manage, what would your advice be to a large authority like Birmingham City Council, and what would you say be the best way for them to go about advertising the right to manage, and encouraging those where it's realistic, where there's a good chance it's going to work out well, to go ahead and do that?
Thank you. That's quite a loaded question, but very important right now. I haven't actually come across a tenant management organization where residents have said to me it's fantastic and it's good. I mean, you hear some great stuff, but you mostly hear the complaints, and that could also be because of the roles and the jobs that we have, that actually people aren't going to come to tell us that things are great. People are more likely to come to tell us that things don't work and things need to change. I'm more on the come from the school of thought that local authorities should be managing their own stocks. I don't really understand why you need to have a managing agent, especially because I think there is a financial efficiency that can be made with having everything in one place. So if it's an ALMO you have, I can understand the ALMO managing your stock, and that there's different setups of that. But if you've got a council, I don't really understand when the council decides to commission out a managing agent, and I've yet to see a really good example of that. So my first sort of instincts would always be, and I wouldn't want to advise residents that that aren't in Tower Hamlets, because I feel like one of the things that is missing is empowering residents. I want to be able to give residents all the information and then let them decide what they think is the best way forward. And if that means, with all the information about right to manage, if that they feel that this is what's right for them and that they can take on board some of the because none of, just to be clear, no system is perfect. Everything's going to come with some level of issues. It's about the context of the building and the state and how old it is and who's managing it and the local authority. I mean, I'm sure there's local authorities out there that have TMOs that are great and it works. I've just not come across that because I happen to live in London, and we tend to have a lot of cases where it's not working. And Kensington was the biggest example for this country about what's the worst that can happen when a TMO doesn't work, and that combined with a local authority that wasn't paying attention. I think all three has value. I will always try and promote more public control from local authorities than anything else. If that's what you wanted to hear about my personal opinion, I would always think, because then you have you have officers oversight, you have politicians oversight, and people. It gives the power back to the residents. It gives power back to the people of that borough, because if their councillors are not doing their job, every 4 years they've got to come up for an election. And there are loads of places across the country where people from residents association and tenants associations actually stand to become councillors just so they can do this. So I think there is a lot more manoeuvring if it's done through the local authority.
Yeah, because the sort of problem in Birmingham has been is we've had massive cuts over the last, we're probably saying like over the last 15, 16 years, there's been like massive cuts, especially under the previous Lib Dem Tory administration, who, to be honest with you, I mean, they cut services back to the bone up here. I mean, we used to have like a housing office in Harborne, and that was closed down. Building was sold off, it was demolished, was put on the private market, put out on the private market to buy, and now we don't have a council-based housing office in Harborne anymore. Other neighbourhood offices have had to close down because of these huge cutbacks, and that's really, really badly affected the way in which the council can be able to manage and deal with things, because there just isn't the manpower there that was once there to be able to run it properly, take on all the pressure, take on the responsibilities, the workload and all the rest that goes with it. So yeah, it's been a bit of an issue. I said
So Kevin, as Asma's saying that in Tower Hamlets she hasn't seen a TMO that works. What might be quite nice is the next time Asma's up in Birmingham, just invite her over to see Four Towers.
Yeah, sure, that's no problem. I'll speak to my housing manager and the chair, and we'll arrange that for you next time you're up in Birmingham.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
Any other thoughts, questions? No? Okay. Asma, do you want to make any concluding remarks? You don't have to, but
Just to say thank you and thanks to everyone's contribution. This was really good to hear everyone's point of view. And, we are, one thing that comes across from today's conversations that we're having is that we are all on the same page about what we see is the reality that we see and the change that we want to really be able to achieve. And I hope I didn't come across as too much of a Debbie Downer, because there is hope. We do have a Labour government, and we've got to, we have to take into consideration that this Labour government has come in and only been elected for a year after 15 years of Tory shambles. And it will take time. Unfortunately, there isn't an overnight solution. And one of the strongest things that the Labour movement has is its membership, and that's its biggest assets. And we've got to make sure we are having the conversations that we need to have, as difficult as it can be. And I think just making sure that we're also staying hopeful and positive about the changes, and it will happen. It will come.
Thanks, Asma. So I knew you were going to be brilliant, and you have been brilliant. But thank you very much. And yeah, thanks to everyone who's joined us, and see everybody soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to drop my email address for those that wanted to
Oh
carry the
yeah, we'll just
conversations
pause
on.
for a second. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've just added my email in the chat box. I know a few people said they'd like to carry the conversation forward, so please get in touch and
Yeah,
I'll make sure I
Kevin
respond.
and Pieter said they'd like to get in
Yeah.
touch on different issues. So yeah,
All right.
okay, yeah, we'll just hold off closing the meeting for a couple of minutes so people. Oh yeah, and also Layla wanted to make that councillor connection as well.
Yeah. And Andy, thank you so much for today facilitating this and working so hard and promoting this very widely, and Joss as well, who's been helping us. So a big thank you, because without both of you, things like this don't happen, and a lot of work goes on behind the scenes. So thank you very much.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody that wants Asma's addresses, and I got it.
Yeah, copied it. Yeah.
Yeah, all
Yeah.
done.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we can close the meeting.
you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.